we'll get into a discussion then about the situation in the Middle East. Let's bring in Emeritus Professor of International Relations at Wits Gilbert Khadiagala. Prof, thank you so much for your time. Let's weigh in then on what is currently happening in Gaza. I mean, we've just heard now from the Secretary General Guterres again calling for stability in the region. I mean, and the end, of course, in Gaza to also end. And yet 7 months on, there's still so much fighting. We've seen now the escalation of bombardment in Rafah. What will it take then for Israel to come to the party and heed not only what the UN is saying, a ceasefire, but also some of its allies like the US are stepping into the party?
No, the international community has been demanding that Israel not attack Rafah because it's the last refuge of Palestinians who've been fleeing from the north, from the center. This is the last refuge of Palestinians, and this town is only before the war it was 275,000, but currently now it has 1.5 million people. So the attack on Rafah is actually the last assault, and the Israelis are claiming that the intelligence are saying, there are Hamas fighters there, there are tunnels there, and they need to fulfill that objective of destroying Hamas. And this is the last stronghold of Hamas. So that is the objective. But of course, the humanitarian consequences are very dire. And that is what the international community has been predicting for the last 1 month, that don't attack because it is going to have very dire humanitarian consequences. But now that the attack has happened, the Israeli army was claiming that it's a limited operation and maybe humanitarian assistance may resume at some point, maybe today or tomorrow. But it's not very clear because it looks like now the war is escalating with airstrikes on most of the regions within the Rafah. So I don't know whether in fact it's a limited operation or whether it's in fact an escalation. We have to watch because the ceasefire talks were supposed to resume in Cairo. But I don't think now the Palestinians are going to be willing, in fact, to go to Cairo. They're already there, but I don't know whether there will be now the final talks on a ceasefire because the Palestinians have already hinted that they are going to accept most of what Israel has been demanding.
Now, Prof, it's very hard to see how genuine, in fact, these truce talks really are, between Israel and Hamas in the main, given just this escalation of the bombing that we are seeing in an already decimated Gaza. Hamas also saying that in a statement that Israel's incursion is aimed at undermining ceasefire efforts. I hear what you are saying about the Palestinians also not being comfortable to engage in these talks in Cairo. What seems then to be at the heart of reaching the ceasefire agreement? What will it take in as far as these talks are concerned?
It could be two ways. One is that Israel has all along been negotiating in bad faith because everybody expected that at the very moment when the ceasefires are almost reaching an agreement, ceasefire negotiations are reaching an agreement, that in fact they would not attack Rafah. So that's the first point. But the second point is that it could be probably the last statement that Israel is making on the war front, and maybe this gives them a cover for them to begin to make concessions at the negotiating table. So we hope probably this is the latter position would be the more dominant, so that the Rafah attack is the last of the attacks, and maybe Israel is now comfortable and confident that it can go to Cairo and negotiate more strongly because they pretty much conquered the entire Gaza because this was the last stronghold of the Hamas in the region. And since it's been attacked, it's been occupied, I don't see how the Palestinians are going to recover from this kind of assault. So Israel is now in a much stronger position probably to negotiate a peace agreement, a ceasefire agreement, and then we can see whether in fact that ceasefire agreement will last. Because it's easy to talk about a ceasefire agreement, but whether it's going to last is another bigger problem.
Now, as we're talking about a ceasefire agreement that will last, we're probably entering the terrain of just to see what the long-term solutions are. I mean, we are seeing, the global pressure leveled at Israel. Primarily it's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the form of the protests that we are seeing both internationally and, of course, what we're seeing in the U.S. at universities and in Israel, with Israelis themselves up in arms, saying that this war needs to end, that in fact, the hostages need to be released. One would then hope, or at least, want to see some movement in as far as the International Court of Justice is concerned, or even the ICC.
There are people who speculate that Israel or rather the Prime Minister Netanyahu has invested politically in this conflict. And he probably doesn't want to see an entry because of the fear that probably the ICC will come after him or other international criminal systems. I don't know. But again, if there is a ceasefire, I think there is pressure within Israel because the hostages, about 100 hostages, are still under Hamas's hands. So the pressure domestically is to get the hostages back home. If there is a ceasefire that gets the hostages back home, it removes the pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to make bigger concessions. But we expect that at least the international community is expecting at this point that there will be a ceasefire that would constitute the beginnings of a broad-based peace agreement between the two. But I don't know whether, in fact, we are at a point where we can begin to speculate on the terms of a broad peace agreement between Israel and Gaza. A ceasefire agreement will simply be the beginning of what is going to be a very lengthy process. If all the parties are prepared to take that step, maybe peace can return to the region. But as of now, I think with the attack on Rafah, it reveals that it is going to be very difficult to pull the Israelis back from the position that they have taken from day one, that they want to destroy Hamas from the face of the earth.
Prof, we asked this question before when we saw Israel retaliating following that Hamas attack on October 7, that once Israel has then gotten rid of Hamas, if at all it can, what then? I mean, what does that mean, from a long-term solution? I mean, is this two-state solution still on the cards at this point? I mean, a lot has been damaged up to so far.
There's still a large population of Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem. So if we talk about a two-state solution, there are still very many avenues for achieving that objective. And of course, the people in Gaza, they are here and the Israelis will have to deal with that problem because it's not going to go away, even if you destroy Hamas. And some people are very skeptical about, in fact, whether Hamas can be destroyed militarily, because it's still very much scattered all over the place. So the two-state solution is the long-term solution, but I don't know whether we are there yet. I don't know whether the parties on the ground and the neighboring countries and the mediators are focusing on that big long-term solution, which is we need to get back to the international agreements around a two-state solution. But for now, I don't see that happening. I think the ceasefire, if it comes, it will provide more humanitarian assistance, maybe the release of refugees, the release of the hostages, and maybe the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israel. But we need confidence-building measures between the two parties before we can begin to talk about a two-state solution. And I think for now, there are very urgent humanitarian issues that we need to deal with around the conflict. And that's why the focus should be on getting back to the Cairo negotiations and trying to reach some kind of ceasefire agreement.
We know that the Cairo negotiations are largely, being managed by, leaders in the region. The focus also needs to somehow be on the United States of America and its role. How powerful do you think the U.S. Or influential rather it will be at this point in time where a ceasefire is needed, as you say, because of the scale of the humanitarian crisis at the very least? We know that Biden himself is under pressure to have the ceasefire, given the fact that he's also dealing with his domestic issues as it relates to how the Biden administration has been handling these issues in Israel.
The Biden administration has been trying to be more tough on Mr. Netanyahu over the last few weeks. I think they have been very forthright that they need a ceasefire. Israel needs to do more to address the humanitarian disaster in Gaza. But there are limits, and we can see from the way Israel has reacted to American entreaties is that there are very clear limits. The Israelis are not going to take all that the Americans are telling them. But I think the most important thing today is that the administration is supposed to present to Congress a report on whether Israel is committing crimes, international crimes in the Gaza. So that report is going to be very instructive, because if it comes out that it says, yes, Israel is committing crimes, domestic US crimes and international crimes in Gaza, then there will be a lot of pressure on the US, in fact, to do something about Israeli procrastination on this conflict. Because this report has been commissioned by the Biden administration and is mandatory that it has to go to Congress today. So it will be very interesting to see what that report says about Israel, but also piling up the pressure on Israel, in fact, to begin to withdraw. And we already begin to see that in the protests in universities and all over, in fact, globally. So it's a very difficult position for the Biden administration, because it has to respond to growing pressures to be hard on Israel. But again, the Biden administration cannot alienate some of its Israeli supporters in Congress and some of its supporters within the larger American community. Elections are coming up this year, so it's a very tight situation for Mr. Biden. Whatever he does from now on is going to be very decisive, not just in how the war goes on, or whether there's going to be a ceasefire in the Gaza, or whether, in fact, the American administration is going to be much, much harder on Israel from here, because their weapons were already suspended. I think last week there was a pressure to suspend weapons to Israel. So these are actions that are showing the U.S. wants to be more proactive. But whether it can be listened to by the Israelis is another matter.
Prof, thank you so much for your analysis and, of course, your time.